Hi, everybody. Today I'm going to talk about why academics don't get Bitcoin. I've spent 8 years in this space and I've heard them constantly say Bitcoin's not fast enough. Bitcoin can't do this. Bitcoin can't do that. Bitcoin doesn't have enough transactions per second. Well, I'm going to dive into that philosophy and mindset that they have and uncover why they fundamentally don't get Bitcoin. Before we begin, I want to give a shout out to my sponsor, Ledin. Ledin is a great place to lend your Bitcoin and earn a yield. It's around 5%, 5 to 6% right now. Disclaimer, you are taking risk with your coin when you do this, but Ledin is one of the best places to go do it. So before we begin, let's go ahead and switch over here. This is an article that I write, so why academics don't get Bitcoin. I write this first on Thursdays. It comes out in a report that I write called the Held Report. And on Sundays, which is when you're watching this is when I share it and add a little bit more commentary. Okay, so let's go ahead and dive in here. Academics live in a bubble. So what they strive for is more of university pedigree. They're not looking for, looking at actual data and solving problems. They're looking for pedigree of they went to Harvard, Yale, Berkeley. But this is actually divorced from real world success that requires them to actually solve a problem. And in this bubble, they can isolate and try different experiments. But those experiments are isolated. And then they're validated by other academics, which means it's a sort of a self-reinforcing or self-referencing loop of one academic produces a piece of content. So they produce a research report. Some others go, oh, that's interesting. And they don't care about if it actually solves a problem or if they're right. They care that other academics view their content or view their research in a way that socially validates them in their circle. And, just to add a piece of color here, more than 70% of researchers have tried and failed to reproduce another scientist's experiments. And more than half have failed to reproduce their own experiments. If you can't reproduce the experiment, that means that the original result is basically bullshit. So essentially here, what we're seeing is a huge portion of research is basically garbage. And it's because very few of them go validate each other's research. They more of say, oh, what a great report. That was really interesting. But then they don't get dig in and replicate it. The real world works really differently. It's very complex. Causation, why did one thing cause another, is difficult, if not impossible, to ascertain. So there's many different things that are going on that influence an outcome. Determining what made something happen is an exercise in confidence. So I've worked at Uber and I've worked at other tech companies, including right now where I lead growth at Kraken. We're extremely data driven. And so when we look at an outcome that was run during an experiment, we look at how confident we are in the results. Have we reached statistical significance? How confident are we in those results? And then we make business decisions that impact millions of people or millions or billions of dollars because of those decisions, whereas academics don't have that. And we'll cover that in a second. That's called skin in the game. And so these researchers, these academics, they consider themselves the most knowledgeable, but in reality, they're the least knowledgeable because they don't actually understand how the world works. They reject empirical data and instead go and celebrate experiments in a lab. And Nassim Taleb had a really great quote here. The curse of modernity is that we are increasingly populated by a class of people who are better at explaining than understanding, or better at explaining than doing. And ultimately, that's what it's about. It's about practicing things in the real world. And academics just don't do that at all. Academics didn't build companies. They didn't go, most academics didn't go do that sort of thing. They don't understand what it takes to go make something happen. And there's a really big problem of not having any skin in the game. Since they run isolated experiments that are disconnected from reality, they don't often think about second or third order thinking. They don't think about the consequences of their actions. For example, they might advocate for the removal of a dictator, but then don't think through who might replace them. There's no consequence to having a bad action. And there's all sorts of things that Nassim Taleb lists out here of different things that have been wrong. I think we all remember like the food pyramid that food pyramid was shared widely in high school, middle school in the United States and in elementary school. And a lot of that's been somewhat debunked as like a kind of a quirky thing that it's not really rooted in true science. There's other things as well. And we're going to get to Bitcoin in a minute and why classic academics, that Bitcoin is this new thing that they just weren't able to understand, even though it is the right thing. It is the thing that makes sense. And ultimately, if you don't take risks for your opinion, then your opinion's worthless. Like, who cares if you go have an opinion on X, Y, or Z topic, but you don't actually have any risk of being wrong? And that's what's so interesting about operators in the real world or investors, is that you have to put capital behind your thesis, your idea. And if it doesn't do well, then you're going to lose money. It's the ultimate vote of confidence in something. As Nassim Taleb says, don't tell me what you think, tell me what you have in your portfolio. Wanted to give another shout out to one of my sponsors, CryptoTag. CryptoTag is the best way to store your Bitcoin. This is made out of titanium, which means it can really survive a ton of crazy sort of events that can happen to it. It's crush proof, waterproof, very fireproof. It's made out of titanium, so it has a much higher melting point. It can survive most fires, but there's still some fires that might get too hot. On here is where you will etch your backup, so your 12 to 24 word backup. Cool. All right. Well, let's switch back to the article real quick. What is the relationship between governments and academia? Well, as the government has grown larger as a percentage of GDP, academia played an important role in enforcing the legitimacy of the government. I mean, government spending is massive. It's basically 40% of the economy, which is nuts considering that it's very, very inefficient with little oversight compared to real world endeavors where we go build things. Every aircraft that you've flown in, every car that you've driven in, every house that you've been in, every piece of food that you eat is based on capitalism, based on the ability to go produce goods cheaper, faster, easier than before, not because of governments allocating capital. So this is a really scary metric, and academics play a big portion of that. And economists represent the financial aspect of the academic world. They reinforce that government spending is the right thing to do. They show proof that Keynesian economics works, and then they get more funding from the government to then prove that out. Case in point, in 2020 alone, the Federal Reserve spent $90 million on research and statistics. That's pretty crazy because and some of that's in the form of like grants that they give to different economists at these different universities to go reinforce the idea that what they do is making a positive impact in the world, which is pretty crazy. Because when we look at historically like how this has progressed, we've seen very little insight into like that this actually worked. All right, so why are mainstream economists quacks? Mainstream economists are predominantly Keynesian economists, which means that they believe that they can control levers of the economy to plan and influence it. Furthermore, this view is endorsed by governments globally because then it gives them control over the economy and of their people under the guise of helping markets. And here's what's really crazy, though, is that when we look at their ability to predict the future, they have no ability to predict the future. So this is essentially like the FOMC, the Fed forecasts for their fund, for their rates, the futures pricing, or this is the market pricing the future of rates for the Fed, and essentially, and then the orange line is what actually happened. Essentially, no one knows where the world's going to go. No one can plan the economy. And I think this very much highlights that problem of like the blue lines are all of the guesses of the world cumulatively over what was going to happen, and orange is what did happen. There's no pattern here. No one can predict where the world's going to go. And ultimately, these Keynesian economists, they think that they can, though. They think that they can solve this impossible data problem. So to go in on this a little bit more deeply, these academics, so these economists, there's an ingestion, processing, and decision bottleneck. The economy can't be planned by a central authority because there's no way that a central authority can have all the necessary knowledge to make all the decisions at any point in time, let alone all points in time. To plan effectively, these economists would have to ingest trillions of data points, ingest those data points in a perfect manner, which is impossible. Think about it. Every single Uber taken, every single sandwich eaten, every single in-app purchase. Philip Tetlock has a really great quote on this. We need to believe in a predictable, controllable world, so we turn to authoritative sounding people who promise to satisfy that need. Economists and bankers push the need to create central banks because they wanted the world to make sense for the population to feel that someone was in charge. But even if we were to ingest perfect data, it's impossible to infer simple causality. Like, what's the relationship between, while the relationship between weather and crops might seem easy, how do we determine the causality of burrito demand? Economics isn't like the sciences. We have incomplete data. We have incomplete sample sizes. We can't run the .com bubble with a different central bank or a different president or different policy. It's not how you run an experiment. And since big events come out of nowhere, like COVID, no one predicted COVID. Forecasts actually do more harm than good, giving the illusion of predictability in a world where unforeseen events control most outcomes, black swans. As Carl Rickard says, risk is what's left over when you've thought of everything. And Daniel Kahneman also has a great quote on this. Hindsight, the ability to explain the past, gives us the illusion that the world is understandable. It gives us the illusion that the world makes sense, even when it doesn't make sense. And that's a big deal in producing many mistakes in many fields. And here's a useful analogy to leave you with. Here's essentially these economists. So essentially the Fed is driving the car, which is the economy, only using the rear view mirror, historical data, which is foggy. And the front windshield is completely dark. You can't see the future. Well, how could the Fed possibly drive the car with any accuracy? What if we just let the car be autonomous and drive itself? And so now we're going to cover Bitcoin. When Bitcoin came around, these economists couldn't possibly reconcile their old academic world of nonsense with this new financial experiment. They insisted it would be impossible for Bitcoin to work. The lack of control and the fixed supply were ludicrous. That's nuts. And what we see here is, even till today, which is insane that they're still having this stance, because Bitcoin has operated for 12 years. You can't say this after 12 years, and it's worth $1 trillion. Even all the way up till this year, we've got quote unquote, economists saying that Bitcoin can't work. I mean, it's absurd. And Bank of England governor, cryptocurrency investors should be prepared to lose all their money, and that essentially it's worthless. This is classic academic sort of thinking. They cannot reconcile the fact that they're wrong. They like everything in their lab, and it challenges the entirety of their existence, their validity. Bitcoin has survived 12 years with no marketing, no development budget, and no monetary policy changes. It's proven through time that it works. The Bitcoin network keeps itself alive through the collective will of its users, who have all the skin in the game to defend and protect its existence, the hodlers. When we think about Bitcoin's 21 million hard cap, Bitcoin is the equivalent of scientific integrity. The system must not permit the manipulation of data after the experiment has begun or has taken place. And so that 21 million hard cap is that fixed ruler. The results of the experiment can't be altered. And so central planning mechanism, the Fed and economists can't tinker with it. They can't mess with the experiment. The experiment is rock solid. And we can kind of think about it like we have a meter. It's a fixed amount. There's a kilogram. It doesn't keep changing. But in our existing financial system, the value of everything and the value of experiments, the experiments of entrepreneurial outcomes are all dictated by inflation, and they're constantly changing. Bitcoin is the perfect iteration on monetary policy. It has a hard cap for a couple different reasons. It's a precise measuring stick. It reduces political attack vectors and encouraging speculative bubbles, which act as a viral loop, which acquire new hodlers and grows Bitcoin. Regarding the political attack vectors, Satoshi felt that setting a proper rate of inflation was impossible, so he decided to remove human decision-making from the process. He's got two quotes around that. Indeed, there is nobody to act as a central bank or Federal Reserve to adjust the money supply as the population of users grows. That would have required a trusted party to determine the value, because I don't know of a way for software to know the real world value of things. Satoshi, I think, in this context is being sarcastic, because Bitcoin is all about not having to trust third parties. And then Satoshi also says, if there was some clever way, or if we wanted to trust someone to actively manage the money supply, to peg it to something, the rules could have been programmed for that. Trust, again, I think he's joking, like it's all about trust here, and there's just no way to reduce that trust to zero other than setting the hard Bitcoin's monetary policy with a fixed supply. And then he finally hypothesized that a fixed supply might create speculative bubbles. As the number of users grows, the value per coin increases. It has the potential for a positive feedback loop. As users increase, the value goes up, which could attract more users to take advantage of the increasing value. He's describing FOMO here. And so all of this proves that Bitcoin worked in the real world. It doesn't matter what the economists say. It doesn't matter that they say, we can go build a new Bitcoin, a better Bitcoin. Bitcoin has worked and proven its worth over the last 12 years. It is totally demonstrated that. It's a revolution in monetary policy. Academics and economists can't reconcile that their time is over. Well, I hope everyone enjoyed this today. If you really, really liked it, throw me a like. That helps me out a ton. Definitely boost the engagement of this video so more people can see it. If you want to subscribe, definitely hit that subscribe button. Thanks again. All right, cheers. Bye.